The brazier glows orange in the corner of a cramped room. A barber-surgeon reaches for a blade thin, curved, still carrying the faint residue of its last patient. He passes it through the flame, watches the metal darken, then sets it on a cloth that has seen better days. Steam rises from a copper basin nearby. The water was boiled an hour ago, maybe 2. Outside, church bells toll. Inside, someone waits on a wooden table, biting down on leather, praying this time will be different. This is surgery before the microscope, before anyone knew what a bacterium looked like or that it even existed. And yet, something is happening here, something deliberate. The blade passes through fire. The water was heated. There is a logic at work, even if no one in this room could explain it in terms we would recognize today. So here is the question most people never ask. If no one knew germs existed, how could anyone sterilize anything? And if these methods were just superstition, why did some of them actually save lives? The answer is stranger than you might expect, because long before germ theory, long before Pasteur or Lister or Koch, people were already fighting an invisible war. They just didn't know who the enemy was. They couldn't see the battlefield. And yet somehow, scattered across centuries and continents, they stumbled onto weapons that actually worked. Most of us learn a simplified version of medical history. Ancient and medieval practitioners were ignorant, the story goes. They bled patients, balanced humors, and operated with filthy instruments until modern science swept in like a conquering hero. It is a neat narrative. It is also dangerously incomplete. Here is what the standard story misses. Some pre-germ practices genuinely reduced infection, not because practitioners understood microbiology, but because heat, chemistry, and dryness can kill or remove pathogens whether you know they exist or not. The real question is why some methods worked, why most failed, and why the difference was almost impossible to see without a lens no one had invented yet. We are going to trace the logic behind tools passed through flames, wounds washed with wine, and instruments stored in ways that made all the difference. But we are also going to confront an uncomfortable truth. Cleaning a tool was never enough. The chain of contamination had dozens of links, and snapping one did not break the others. Let us start with the most intuitive method, fire. In countless settings across centuries, practitioners heated metal tools before use. Barber-surgeons in medieval Europe, military surgeons on Napoleonic battlefields, midwives in rural villages with only a hearth and a prayer, blacksmiths reforging instruments, sailors cauterizing wounds on pitching decks. The technique varied wildly. Some passed blades through open flame for seconds, others heated them until they glowed. Some dipped hot metal into oil or wine, but the instinct was consistent. Fire purifies. And in a very real sense, they were right. High heat denatures proteins. It disrupts cell membranes. It kills microorganisms by literally cooking them. A blade heated to glowing and allowed to cool properly could reach temperatures high enough to destroy most bacteria on its surface. The practitioners did not know this. They often attributed the effect to driving out evil spirits or balancing elemental forces. But the physics did not care about their explanations. So why did people still die in enormous numbers? Why did infection remain the great killer until the late 19th century? Because heating a blade for 3 seconds does almost nothing. Because the cloth it landed on was contaminated. Because hands touched it before use. Because the water used to cool it came from a fouled well. Method matters. Execution matters more. Now consider liquids. Wine, vinegar, distilled spirits. Records from ancient Rome, medieval monasteries, and Renaissance surgical manuals describe washing wounds or instruments with alcohol or acidic solutions. Wine was thought to be strengthening, vinegar associated with purification, strong spirits believed to drive out corruption. The underlying chemistry had real effects. Alcohol above a certain concentration disrupts microbial cell walls. Acetic acid can lower pH enough to inhibit bacterial growth. Washing a wound with wine genuinely reduced pathogen load in some cases. But the problem was concentration. Tavern wine might be watered down. Vinegar might be old and weak. Distilled spirits strong enough to disinfect were rare and expensive. What worked in a wealthy surgeon's practice was unavailable in a field hospital. And here is what most people miss. Even when alcohol killed surface bacteria, it did nothing to address the deeper problem. Pathogens were everywhere in the air, on hands, in bandages reused from previous patients. Cleaning one tool was like locking one door in a house with no walls. Smoke and resins form another category. Fumigation was common in many cultures, from ancient Greece to medieval Islamic hospitals. Burning aromatic woods, resins like pine pitch, or herbs such as rosemary and thyme was thought to cleanse the air and drive off miasmas. Ships were fumigated below decks, sick rooms filled with fragrant smoke. Some practices had marginal benefit. Certain plant compounds contain antimicrobial chemicals. Thymol from thyme has genuine antibacterial properties. Smoke reduces insect populations, which matters when flies carry pathogens from corpse to wound. Pine resin creates barriers somewhat inhospitable to bacteria, but fumigation was wildly inconsistent. Burning lavender smells pleasant. It does not sterilize a bone sore. Salt and ash represent yet another approach. Ash water, essentially weak lye, was used for cleaning across pre-industrial settings. Sailors scrubbed decks with it. Cooks cleaned vessels. Some practitioners washed instruments in alkaline solutions. Salt was rubbed into wounds as preservation or purification. Alkaline solutions break down organic matter and strip biofilms. Salt creates osmotic environments hostile to many microbes. These had real chemical action, but weak solutions did little. Impure water added contaminants. Hands that touched the cleaned item redeposited bacteria instantly. Then there are the metals themselves. Copper, silver, and bronze have oligodynamic properties. The ions they release can inhibit microbial growth over time. Ancient peoples did not understand ionic chemistry, but they noticed water stored in certain vessels stayed fresher. Silver coins were dropped into water barrels on long voyages. Copper vessels were preferred for storing wine. The effect is slow and incomplete. A copper basin does not sterilize like boiling does. But combined with dryness, which deprives bacteria of moisture to multiply, metal storage in dry conditions could preserve tools in relatively low-risk condition. And that brings us to the hidden villain, recontamination. You can boil a blade, wash it in wine, store it in copper in a dry room. Then, seconds before use, a surgeon with unwashed hands picks it up, or a fly lands on the edge, or it touches a table still damp from the last patient. The chain of cleanliness is only as strong as its weakest moment, and in pre-germ settings, almost no one understood the chain existed. This is where the real horror lives. Not ignorance of methods, ignorance of vectors. Even careful practitioners undid their own work without knowing it. Fire the blade good, set it down fine, touch it fine. They could not see the invisible passengers at every stage. Now let us put this into motion. Imagine a military camp after a major battle. Wounded men stream in faster than anyone can count. Rain has turned paths between tents into rivers of mud. The surgeon, skilled, experienced, knows from observation that clean tools produce better outcomes. He orders water boiled, passes blades through flame, lays them on what he believes is clean cloth. But the water came from a river fouled by upstream latrines. The cloth dried yesterday on a hedge where animals graze. His hands have not been washed since his last meal. Tent flaps hang open, and flies move freely between latrine pits and operating table. A comrade holds the patient down, pressing the wound site with fingers caked in mud. Every step has been compromised. The blade might be sterile for 2 seconds after the flame. By the time it enters flesh, it carries river water, fly legs, unwashed hands, contaminated cloth. The surgeon works quickly. The patient dies of fever 3 days later. The surgeon wonders why his careful methods failed again. This is the tragedy. It was not lack of trying, not stupidity. It was lack of seeing. The enemy was too small, too numerous, too relentless. The battlefield was everywhere. Air, skin, water, every surface between flame and flesh. So why did anyone survive at all? Because probability is not destiny. Reducing pathogen load even partially improves odds. A blade 90% clean is better than one caked in blood. Boiled water, even if slightly recontaminated, carries fewer organisms than stagnant pond water. And some patients had immune systems strong enough to fight moderate contamination. The methods were not useless. They were insufficient. The gap between those two words is measured in lives. Here is the science stripped bare. Microorganisms need moisture, moderate temperatures, organic matter. Heat destroys them. Alcohol damages their structures. Dryness slows reproduction. Metal ions interfere with metabolism. Physical cleaning removes what they feed on. When a practitioner happened to combine the right methods in sequence, heating thoroughly, cooling in dry air, storing away from contamination, using quickly on a relatively clean wound, outcomes improved, not guaranteed survival, better odds. The problem was that no one could replicate the full chain because no one knew it existed. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Even in good circumstances, wealthy patient, skilled surgeon, clean water, the environment often undid everything. Crowded wards shared air with infected patients. Bandages were reused. Hands moved patient to patient without washing. Windows stayed shut because night air was feared. Wounds were probed with fingers, introducing contamination with every examination. One dirty link broke the chain. Most settings had a dozen. What changed was not invention. It was discipline. When germ theory provided a framework, when Lister used carbolic acid consistently, when Semmelweis demonstrated hand washing, when Koch proved organisms caused diseases, the breakthrough was not new methods. Most already existed. The breakthrough was understanding that every step mattered. That contamination came from hands, air, surfaces, instruments, the previous patient. That sterilization was not one act, but sustained commitment. Before that understanding, people fought in the dark. They lit fires, poured wine, burned incense, stored tools in metal boxes, and prayed. Some of it helped, much did not. The difference was invisible, until someone learned to make the invisible visible. For thousands of years, across continents, humans noticed some wounds healed and some turned fatal. They sought patterns. They developed rituals encoding genuine measures, heat, alcohol, dryness, even when explanations were wrong. They were not fools. They were observers without the one tool that would make sense of observations, ability to see what was killing them. In their rituals, their half-effective methods, we trace outlines of a war always being fought, even when no one knew the enemy. Long before microbes were discovered, people were already fighting them. They just couldn't see the battlefield, couldn't see their enemy, couldn't see how close they sometimes came to winning. And that raises a question for another time. What invisible forces might we be fighting today, with methods that work for reasons we do not yet fully understand?